Rabbi Estrin and his wife today live in Miami Beach, or North Miami Beach, Florida. And from there, he conducts all his activities for the U.S. Airmen and the Marines and so on and so forth. And it gives me great pleasure and an honor to introduce to you Rabbi Estrin, who shareth us his remarkable journey of faith, the ups and downs of life, and going through what him and his family continue to go through. And I just recently saw a picture of his son. I mean, he looks extremely happy, and it's unbelievable. So really, it's an honor and a humble pleasure to introduce Rabbi Estrin. Please.
Thank you, Rabbi Deitch. I appreciate it. And obviously, I appreciate the friendship from the distance. You know, one of the ways that we did get through everything that we did, as you know, I'll tell you, is because of the friendship that we had without, like you said, without knowing each other. Just the WhatsApp groups really just kept us afloat, and kept us afloat through what? Well, you'll hear that momentarily. So we've decided to call this talk of medicine, miracles, and mindsets. And I want to start off with the mindsets, because these are ideas that many of you probably came across, you know, as Jews, and certainly either connected to Chabad or being involved with Chabad in a more personal and intense way, studying Chabad literature in particular, but Judaism at large. You will have heard these ideas. These ideas they won't be brand new. But the difference is that you sometimes have ideas that remain academic, and then you have ideas when they actually come and apply in a really practical way, and you see how these things really influence the way your life goes. There was actually an interesting interview with General David Goldfein, who's the Chief of Staff of the Air Force right now, and he described the first time he was flying an F-15 into battle, and he was wondering, what is it going to be like, you know, actually having people firing, you know, trying to shoot me, trying to kill me. And as he went into battle, he thought to himself, you know, this is exactly like training. And the training set in, he knew what he needed to do, and he was able to apply that training into the circumstances. In our circumstances, there was a similar kind of feeling that we knew that we had to make battle, and we knew that we had certain elements of Judaism that gave us the capability to make battle. And even though obviously that wasn't a lot of fun, but at least that gave us the mindset to be able to get through. So these are 5 mindsets that you'll hear throughout the story that were critical. Number 1 is the idea that God can do anything, whatever he wants, that God is fully capable of any response to any circumstances. God created nature so he can work within nature, or if he so desires, to go beyond nature. He can break nature. He can create miracles. That's a basic idea in Judaism. Should be nothing new to all of you here. Number 2 is the value of each individual life. There's an idea that when the body and soul are together, that every moment that they're together is a godly mission. And so therefore what's going on, whether or not we can see it or whether or not we understand it, is something of intense greatness. And it's just a matter of appreciating that and recognizing that every single life is of truly infinite value, because a life is godly. That's the second idea. The third idea is an idea that was taught actually originally from the Talmud, but the extension was taught by the third Rebbe of Lubavitch, and that was, the Talmud says that doctors were given permission to heal, and the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad, added on to it, to heal, but not to predict. And that's an extremely important idea. That prediction is for fortune tellers or for others, but not for doctors. Doctors need to focus on healing. Number 4 is the idea of trach gut v'zayin gut. It's a Yiddish saying that you should think good, and therefore it will be good. And this is, it sounds very simplistic, but the idea, as it's expanded in Hasidic philosophy in particular, is that when you think good, you create a channel through which God gives you extra blessings. So there's a creation of goodness that happens when you try to focus on goodness. And when you recognize that everything essentially is coming from God, and God is the ultimate of goodness, so therefore you realize that everything is good, and a recognition of that creates goodness. And that was the 4th idea. And the 5th idea is that being that everything is from God, everything has purpose, and it's just a matter of trying to figure out what is my mission, what's my job, what am I supposed to do in this particular circumstance. So those are the 5 mindsets that you'll see come up throughout the story. So let's go back about 16 years ago. My oldest son was born. He was came into this world a little bit on the early side. He was a 26-weeker, so he was a pound 15 ounces. And thank God, not much of an exciting story, because it was mostly just gainer and grower. He was in the hospital for 3 months. And during that time, we met a Jewish doctor by the name, we're going to call him Dr. Ralph. He was a neonatologist. And I just bring that up because Ralph is an important figure in this story. So after my son Yehuda was born, and thank God, came home from the hospital, and been gaining, growing ever since then. He might say on some days that he's slightly taller than me, but I haven't quite admitted that yet. But thank God we're good. 4 kids in the meantime are born perfectly healthy, thank God. And then my wife was pregnant with our number 6. Rabbi Deitch mentioned that we found out about the diagnosis on Hanukkah. And that's exactly what happened. We had planned a menorah lighting on campus, one of our biggest program every single year on campus, the menorah lighting, of course. And in the morning, my wife was going to go to a 30-week checkup. She went to the checkup, and she called me from in the car on the way back. She said, there's something wrong with the baby's heart. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I saw they were spending too much time around the baby's heart in the ultrasound. And, having been a high-risk patient until that point, she had been through many, many, many ultrasounds. She knew enough to be able to see that this was something significant, but she couldn't obviously define what was going on, and the technician didn't want to say anything. So she went to buy supplies for the program. I'm on campus, and I get a phone call from a nurse, and the nurse, basically says, is your wife there? I said, she's not, but I know there's something wrong with the baby's heart. She said, yeah. I said, okay. Is the baby viable? She really didn't want to answer that question, but I pushed her into a corner, and eventually she said, I don't think so. So I opted to withhold that information from my wife until after the program. I figured that the program would be more successful if my wife could focus on the things that she needed to focus on. And I spoke in front of the menorah that evening, and I said, I was really speaking to myself. And I said, the menorah represents the fact that God did miracles then and does miracles now. And that's actually the blessing that we make, of course, on the menorah. We say, She'asa nisim lavotenu, that God made miracles in those days, bayamim ha'em, bazman hazeh, that God makes miracles nowadays as well. And so that was it was a battle cry for myself, that I should remind myself of what I knew was true. And then after the program, I told my wife, we spoke to the midwife who gave us an approximate, information. She said there are major problems, and told us we'll be seeing a doctor a week after that. Then we had an appointment with the doctor that was 3 hours long. Ultrasound, echocardiogram, they analyzed every last bit of this poor fetus. And after this long, quiet, absolutely silent doctor's appointment, they bring us into a room. There's nothing in the room but a table, and on the table is a box of tissues. They assume that everybody in the room has a cold. And 2 doctors and a social worker come in, cardiologist, an OB, and a social worker. Social worker is taking notes, and the cardiologist starts first. And she explains the following. She says, there's congenital heart disease, and there's a massive range of heart disease that can happen, different heart defects that can arise. There are things that are, just settled on their own, and then there are much more intense things. Your son has all the way on the further extreme. He has 3 of the 12 defects that are considered critical and that you need immediate intervention. Okay, so 3 of the 12. What are the 3? The first one is called total AV canal, which is basically he only has a right ventricle. So instead of having, of course, 2 ventricles, a right and a left ventricle, he only has a right ventricle, and every Chabadnik here is thinking that's wonderful because the right ventricle represents goodness and stuff like that, but it's actually a disease. It's pretty dangerous. And the other two issues are actually bigger issues. So one called pulmonary atresia, which means that the pulmonary valve, which allows the heart to pump blood from the heart to the lungs, just simply isn't there. Instead of a valve being there, it's just a thick flap of skin. And the other issue is called total anomalous pulmonary venous return, which means that the veins that carry blood from the lungs, oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart, are in the wrong place. They went from the lungs to the liver. Practically speaking, what that means is that this baby should not be able to breathe because there's no mechanism to allow proper blood flow. She said, that being said, if this baby survives birth, we'll have to rush him straight into surgery. So actually, my reaction to that was wonderful. You're talking through surgery. Good. We've got to fight. We've got something to do. We're gonna go for it. And then the OB started talking. She said, well, the ultrasound also shows us that besides the heart problems, there are other GI problems. There's either what we call esophageal fistula or esophageal atresia, which means the esophagus is either joined with the trachea or doesn't reach the stomach, or we can't even actually find a stomach on the ultrasound in the first place. And, with all of these major GI issues on top of the cardiac issues, really there's nothing to do. So we said, thank you very much. It was very sweet of you guys to run us over with a 10-ton truck. Now we have to figure out what we're doing. And, the question is again, when you're faced with something like this, you have to take an approach, and the approach has to allow you to be able to fight, to give you the tools to fight with. And so over the years, the first idea was that God's fully capable of doing whatever he wants. We discussed that. The second idea was that, of course, we're going to think positive. So the question is, how do you think positive in this situation? So we decided that the way we're going to think positive was we're going to look for any way that if God decides to make a miracle, we want to be there to catch it. So that was the approach that we decided to take. So how do you take that? Well, first of all, you've got your spiritual things that you need to do. You need to check your mezuzot. You need to check your tefillin, and many elements like that. We actually checked our mezuzot, and what do you know? One of the mezuzot was not kosher, and two words in that mezuzah were not kosher. The words levavchem, which means your heart, and bincha, which means your son. So, all right, we fixed that. Now we're waiting for the miracle, but it wasn't happening quite that quickly. So the next idea was something that the Rebbe always gave practical advice to people as well as spiritual advice. He used to tell people, go for a second opinion. So we sent the scans to Boston Children's, which is one of the top pediatric cardiology centers in the country. And we asked them to review the scans, and they said, we agree with the team in Seattle that surgery on a situation like this would be futile. That was their word. I'm not that much a fan of the word futile anymore. So we struck out again. So now what's the next piece of advice? Well, the Rebbe also told some people to speak to a friend who's a doctor. And this is where we called up this Dr. Ralph, as we'll refer to him, not a cardiologist. He was a neonatologist. And that was a little bit of a mistake because, you can't really mix up specialists, but in this case we thought, well, he deals with babies, and so that's really what we're looking for. And we sat down with Ralph and we had a conversation. Ralph said, this is really, really extreme in terms of his heart disease alone, and with the GI stuff on top of that. I mean, the chances of this child surviving are basically nil, and even if he survives, he's going to be a vegetable. I said, that's not really what we're looking at right now. We understand the situation, but we would like to try to figure out if there's any way for us to be able to save the kid if there's a chance. He said, well, even if you do save the kid, his quality of life will be really, really low. I said, wait, stop there. Quality of life is not something that we're really focused on. Here in Miami, there are people whose Rolls Royce gets scratched and their quality of life is gone. It's over. It's all a relative measure. And so basically, don't talk to me about quality of life. That's not the issue. And I explained to him that, there's the value of every single moment of life. And so therefore, even if the kid can't do everything that everybody else can, well, that's God's decision. And our approach was that life itself is something that we as parents need to protect. We have to do everything we can. And we went back and forth, but it seemed like he agreed with me. And I said, okay, well, are you willing to advocate for us? We'd like to have somebody who's, will help us get, some kind of unique medical care if that's the way to do it. And he said, sure. So we gave him permission to access the files and to become the one of the doctors involved in the case. And so he looked into the files. He said, I'm sorry, I see the same things that the other doctors see. And, he started asking us to prepare for the baby's last moments. I said, wait, that's not really the direction we want to go. In any case, the OBs, my wife was now going to an OB visit every single week, and the OBs started pushing us on the same lines. They also wanted to know if we had his final moments mapped out and all that kind of stuff. And we tried to explain to them, that's not really what we're doing. So there's this actually social worker that came to these OB visits, and she was a Jewish girl who had actually come to one of our Shabbatonim many years before. And she kept on asking me, so would you like to call the Chevra Kadisha, the Jewish Burial Society, or would you like me to call the Chevra Kadisha? And I kept on trying to explain to her, well, first of all, my mother used to use that term, would you like me to do it or are you going to do it? Not the Chevra Kadisha part, just to clarify. But so I wasn't, I wasn't moved by that type of attempt to get me to see her truth, so to speak. But I kept on trying to explain to her that's not the way we Jews look at things. We Jews value every moment of life. And if God decides that this baby lives for an hour, 2 hours, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, that's God's problem. But we're not going to plan for a death that hasn't happened when the baby hasn't even been born yet. And I don't exaggerate when I tell you it would take us 2 to 3 days to recover from every one of these OB visits. It was an incredibly difficult time for us. And at the same time, we're getting this pressure now from Dr. Ralph as well. And I was thinking about it, and I decided that, we really need to make sure that we do everything right for this baby, that the soul's coming down into the body, even if it's for a short amount of time, it has to be done right. So I agreed to have a conversation with a rabbi, somebody of much greater knowledge than me, which is not that hard. There are plenty of rabbis with that kind of knowledge. But Rabbi Farkash is a rabbi out in Bellevue, Washington, nearby, and we asked him to sit down with us and have a conversation with this doctor about the situation and to give us some kind of halachic rulings about what we should do. And so he agreed. We sat down in my house, myself, Ralph, and Rabbi Farkash, and Ralph explained the situation. So Rabbi Farkash said, well, what's the chances that what you're saying is wrong? He said, what do you mean? We see it on the screen. There's no chance that I'm wrong, but I'll give you a 99% chance that I'm right. He said, okay, but well, what's the chance the kid will survive? And I'll never forget the process. He said, listen, if this baby survives birth, that'll be shocking. If the baby then survives the testing that they need to do after birth, that'll be even more surprising. If the baby survives that, he definitely won't survive the ambulance ride from the University of Washington Medical Center, where he'll be born, to Children's Hospital. If he happens to survive that, he will definitely die on the operating table. And if he doesn't die then he'll be a vegetable and will die sometime afterwards. So Rabbi Farkash said, okay, in that case, you're saying that there's nothing you can do. He said, that's correct, there's nothing you can do. So Rabbi Farkash said, okay, so you don't need to send him into surgery if you can't do anything. But the two things that are important is that you are not allowed to withhold air or food from this child. You can't starve him or choke him. And that's basically it. I said, okay, I hear you and I appreciate that. But the approach that we want to take is that we want to prepare for this birth as if this baby can survive. And so that way, if the baby does survive birth, we get him into testing right away and see if there's any way for us to be able to get him into surgery. So Ralph said, actually, there's no problem. We can do that because there's a medicine called prostaglandin, which keeps a small hole between the heart and lungs called the PDA, patent ductus arteriosus. This is a hole that closes usually right after birth. And we're going to give him some prostaglandin that will keep it open for an extra, maybe an hour or two or something like that. And that way we'll be able to do testing and we'll see if there's anything remarkable or anything we can change. So I was happy with that. That was an excellent approach. So this whole period from when the baby was diagnosed to when my wife was induced was 9 weeks. So it was an intense 2 months plus. We move over to actually the birth, and the baby's born, and the very first piece of good news was he cried. So like, okay, now we got something good going on over here. They give him prostaglandin, they suction him, and they're doing the testing on the other side to bring the baby back over to us after about an hour or so. And Ralph looks at me and goes, this baby is not going to survive to see sunset tonight. So this is at about 2 o'clock. Sunset in Seattle in February is at 4:15. And I remember thinking, the words flashed through my head like a neon screen. Who do you think you are? Come on, kid, make it past sunset. Just to show this doctor that he has no right to predict. And that was what it was. So what do? You hold the baby, you sing to him, you pray with him, you're waiting for the baby to die. I mean, that's basically what you're doing. And, we pray mincha and the baby's still alive, pray Ma'ariv and the baby's still alive. We're like, okay, great, he's alive. Now we had been told that there's a 4 to 6 hour window to get him into surgery. So as we're moving up onto that window, the edge of that window, I came over to this nurse. I said, he looks like he's doing perfectly fine. Let's get him into surgery. Can we get a cardiologist to look at him? She's like, well, I said, well, go get a cardiologist. She called a charge nurse from the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU. And NICU charge nurse came in. We had a really, really strange conversation. She's like, what do you want? We're like, well, we want to bring a cardiologist, somebody, because the baby's, looks like he's doing fine. He was a little bit blue, but we were massaging him and he would, kind of go back to his normal, color. And she's like, well, if you want to go, you need to go right now. I said, well, what's the plan? We're not just hopping into an ambulance for no reason. We need to have a plan. We're going somewhere to do something. She said, well, there is no plan. I said, well, I'd like to come up with a plan. She goes, well, the only plan is to do the same scanning we did this morning. I said, well, that didn't help us anything. We need some new plans. She goes, well, there isn't any. I said, well, can't we discuss it with somebody? She goes, well, if you want to go to Children's, you have to go right now. I said, well, what are we going there for? She said, well, that's your choice. If you don't want to go, you don't go. So it was this really, really strange conversation. We ended up not going. That night at about 2 o'clock in the morning, the baby pooped. I said, well, that looks like your baby has a stomach if he pooped. She said, well, no, the nurse said, it just means that he has an intestine. I think I was right, but that was besides the point. And then this entire time I'm trying to tell them, don't look at me like a grieving father. I want you to look at the baby as clinicians. Look at him clinically and decide what you're going to do medically, not as keep me out of the equation. Basically, if I'm a crazy father, keep me out. That's not the point. The point is that clinically, he looks like he's doing great. He's sitting here sucking on a pacifier. He's got no problems whatsoever. And, it was just, they were just waiting. So after he pooped, I said, listen, we can't starve him. We got to get him onto an IV or something like that. She said, oh, don't worry about it. The baby has enough fat reserves for 24 hours, so he'll be fine. If he survives to tomorrow, we can talk about it. I said, okay, but if he's still alive tomorrow morning at 12 o'clock, we're getting him onto an IV. Well, next morning, he was still alive. And I said, let's talk about getting onto an IV. They said, well, Dr. Ralph's coming back. I said, I don't want to speak to him anymore. I felt like at this point there was something about his mannerisms that was really, really bothering me. And she said, well, he's coming. I'm like, well, I'm not going to, tell him to leave. He comes and he says, well, I'm really sorry we told you 4 to 6 hours. Sometimes these things take a little bit longer. I said, yeah, sometimes these two things take 70 or 80 years. What do you, he says, well, it seems like we looked at the scans from yesterday and it looks like he's got something else going on. I told you these things sometimes come with other problems. And I said, what other problem? He says, well, there's something called heterotaxy. Heterotaxy means the internal organs are either flipped upside down, backwards, or any mixture of the two. There's a doctor who once told us, He said, yeah, you want to define heterotaxy? He says, throw 150 defects into a hat and the family gets to pull out 20. That's heterotaxy. So he says, well, so therefore the baby might have a stomach. And if you want, you can try to feed him. You want, you can try to feed your child. You tell that to a Jewish mother. What do you think the Jewish mother is going to say? Get the heck out of here. We're feeding this child. No kidding. And that's exactly what we did. So we filled up a syringe with 5 milliliters of sugar water, put it in his mouth. He drank it. No problems whatsoever. Gave us a look like it's about time you tried to feed me. And we're like, okay, he's drinking perfectly fine. What about, getting up to formula? Now he's eating formula without any problem. So his GI systems apparently work. Why are we not getting him to surgery? And we could not figure out why. So that's the way Tuesday went. Wednesday, at this point, they're trying to get us into hospice care. And we really did not want to go into hospice care, but they're trying to shove us into hospice care. At some point, my wife's old OB comes up and she says to my wife, you've been waiting in this bed. You've been sitting in this bed since Sunday night. You really need to get up and exercise. My wife says, well, can I take the baby with? And she's usually not like that. After she gives birth to babies, she's usually says to me, like, look, I've held this baby for the past 9 months. You take him. But this time, she was just basically between the two of us. She wasn't letting anybody else hold the baby. And she wanted to walk with the baby. And the OB says, yeah, but you won't be able to leave the ward because of the alarm that's on him. And my wife says, he doesn't have an alarm on him. The OB looks down at his leg, sees there's nothing on it. And without another word, she marches out. 5 minutes later, the nurse comes back. And as she's putting the alarm on, and typing something into the computer, she says to my wife, she says, he wasn't admitted as a patient in the hospital until now. So, this is all just like on a constant basis. In the meantime, they're trying to get us out of the hospital, but we're like, to leave the hospital to go so that the baby can die at home. What's the point of that? So eventually they moved us into the neonatal intensive care unit, just because they wanted us out of the labor and delivery ward. And as they did, the nurse had been with us the past 3 days, and she's kind of fluffing the pillows and setting my wife up and trying to make her comfortable. And she's spending a little bit extra time with her. And then as she gets up, I see her face is covered with tears. And she says to my wife, she says, they always forget to say this in these situations, but I just want to tell you, congratulations, your baby's beautiful. And she gives my wife a hug and she walks out. And this was this beautiful moment of humanity in this insanity that we were dealing with. It was really, really special. The next nurse comes in. She introduces herself. She's all bright and chirpy. And she says, hi, my name is Danny. And she sees that we're obviously Orthodox Jews. She says, do you know Josh Newson? We said, of course we know Josh Newson. He was a student who spent 4 years at the University of Washington, virtually every single Shabbat and several days during the week at our house. She says, oh, that's my brother. Like, oh, maybe this is the reason why we're here, to talk to you. So that Wednesday night, we spend some of the time talking to her about Judaism's approach to life, the importance of what she does as a nurse, and asked her to light Shabbat candles when Shabbat comes and that kind of thing. And that's why we're here. But by the next morning, we're like, okay, Thursday morning, we need to get out of here. We need to leave the hospital. It was just, the insanity had really driven us into the ground, and we're exhausted beyond belief, and we weren't receiving any medical care anyway. The entire time that we were there, we didn't see any doctor besides for Ralph. So I said to the charge nurse, I said, okay, we're ready to leave. Give us the discharge papers. We're going. She says, well, you need to sign into hospice. I said, I don't want to. We're not going to. She says, you have to. I said, why do I have to? She said, because otherwise you're going to have a police investigation on you when the baby dies. I said, okay, I don't need that on my head and on top of everything else. So fine, I'll sign on the condition that basically I don't deal with them. I don't want to have them. I'm a trained chaplain. I know what I'm doing, and I just don't want them involved. She says, okay, here's morphine for his last moments. I said, I'm not taking morphine. You haven't trained me to give him morphine. I have 5 kids at home. I'm not having any of them make a l'chaim on it or something like that. Look, I'm not taking it. So she said, okay, you don't have to take it. Then she hands me a bright green piece of paper. And she says, here, sign this. I said, what's this? She says, it's a POST. POST stands for a physician's order for life-sustaining treatment. And really what it is the exact opposite of what those words sound like. It's actually a do not resuscitate form. I said, no, I'm not signing a do not resuscitate form. I said, the whole point was to get him into surgery. And, she said, you have to sign it. I said, I'm not going to. She said, Ralph's going to call you. So Ralph calls our room. And I said, Ralph, I'm not signing it. He said, what happens if the cops stop you and they see the baby blue in the back of the car? They're going to say, where's your DNR? I said, I'm going to tell them that you refused care. He said, well, you have to sign it. I said, my religion does not allow me to sign that. Absolutely not. He said, okay, you take it home. You don't have to sign it. Okay, fine. So now we're getting ready to go. And I come over to the charge nurse. I said, do you mind if I borrow a car seat? Because we either weren't going to need a car seat or the baby was going to go into surgery, one of the two. And she says, you don't need a car seat. You can hold the baby. So she sent us home without a car seat. In the meantime, my wife was, I was packing everything up, getting everything ready to go. And my wife had a conversation with a social worker, which was kind of ridiculous. Number one, she hands my wife a flowery card, thinking of you. And she says to my wife, she says, inside is the phone number for the Chevra Kadisha. We figured it would be easier for your husband to handle on a pretty card. Wasn't that sweet of her? That's the definition of absurd. And the very first thing I did when I got home was take that card and put it straight into the garbage can. If I had an incinerator, I would have been so happy to burn it, but I didn't. So the final thing before we left the hospital was, as I was pushing the stuff out, the social worker says to my wife, would you like the organization, and Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, to come to take pictures of the baby? Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep is an organization, a volunteer organization that takes pictures, generally speaking, of babies who didn't make it. And this is totally macabre and absolutely not in the Jewish approach. And they'd offered this to us over the 9 weeks before every single OB visit. And we kept on saying, no, we don't want to do this. And they offered to us again. And my wife, I was pushing the stuff out, so I didn't hear this part of the conversation. My wife says, well, I'm alive, the baby's alive, you want to send a photographer? Go ahead, I don't care. So we get home, and I need to daven shachrit, so I'm praying. And the first visitor of the day comes up, and that's the hospice care nurse. So at some point I turned around to her, and I did something that very few times, if ever, a Chabad rabbi does. And I told her, I said, listen, sign those papers, get out of my house, and please don't come back. So she heard that I'm a chaplain. She heard that I knew what I was doing, or at least that I professed that I knew what I was doing, one of the two. And she said, okay, she finished signing the papers and she walks out. And as she walks out, I'm just about taking my tefillin off. And another guy walks in. He's got crazy white hair going on. And I, in this sarcastic mood, and I said to him, I said, what is this, Doc Brown from Back to the Future? And he kind of looks at me like, say what? I said, sorry, I mistook you from Back to the Future. And I said, pardon me, I've got my security blanket on. This is the way we Jews pray. And then a little thought comes up in my head. I said, do you happen to be Jewish? He says, well, yes, I am. I said, well, would you like to put on tefillin? He says, well, if you'd allow a secular Jew to do so. I said, it would be the greatest of pleasures. So this guy, who was the photographer from And Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, came to put on tefillin. And I cannot describe it in any other way other than the house, which had been so dark for 9 weeks, lit up with this guy's mitzvah. It was absolutely, it was just unbelievable. And he took a couple pictures and he left us back into our little chaotic world. Kids came home, they're all excited about their brother coming home. We're holding him, massaging him every couple of seconds, making sure he doesn't go completely purple and that kind of thing. And still, we haven't slept for months, so we haven't really gotten to the point where we can actually think clearly. So that night before we went to sleep, I said to my wife, one of the dumbest things I've ever said, out of many dumb things I've told her, but I said, if the baby's still alive tomorrow morning, let's call doctors in the East Coast and see if there's somebody else who can help out. Now, I hadn't been calling other doctors because we've been so indoctrinated that this baby couldn't survive, that it was almost, it was even to us, the situation was not believable. And so therefore it was like, well, he's going to die any minute. So there was no point. That was the situation that we're in. 5 o'clock in the morning, the baby wakes up, and he was feeding on 2-hour shifts, basically every 2 hours on the button. My wife, who is an unbelievably calm person, had not slept at this point for, like I said, several months. She says, Ellie, go make him a bottle. So I stumble out of bed, zombie-like, and I go make a bottle, and I put it on the nightstand, and I get back in bed. I hear a second later, you didn't screw on the nipple. I said, well, I'm sorry. My wife says, you should be. I said, I stumble out of bed again. I go get, a towel, throw it over to try to clean up. And I say, I'm sorry again. She goes, you should be, and now I'm wide awake. And as I'm getting back into bed, I'm like, what am I, an idiot? Why am I getting back into bed? This kid is deathly ill. We need to start calling doctors. So I started making some phone calls, and there's some friends that give me phone numbers or told me about, miracle worker doctors and that kind of thing. We hadn't called them because there's the indoctrination element. But I spoke to a referral rabbi, whose name is Rabbi Leader, who put me in touch with a pediatric cardiologist in New York, whose name is Dr. Abraham Cooper. And Dr. Cooper told me the following. He said, you might know that Washington State was the first state to allow assisted suicide. He said, you've been a victim of the right to die movement. He said, this baby is still alive. You definitely can do something, and you must do something. And now this weight fell off my shoulders, this incredible, we can do something. So at that point, it was 7 o'clock. So I thought to myself, we can call Seattle Children's. Maybe they'd be able to hold him in the ICU until we find a different team to be able to take care of them. I forgot to mention to you before that I asked Dr. Ralph to speak to the surgeons and, to see if any of the surgeons were willing to operate on him. And he told us later, he said, yeah, I spoke to the surgeons, but they said they couldn't do anything because it's too complex. So at 9 o'clock, the cardiologist who diagnosed us called back, and she said, she sounded obviously surprised that the baby was still alive. And she said, what exactly are you guys looking for, kind of thing. I said, well, I understand that Seattle Children's wouldn't take him because he's too complex. She says, wait a second, we were told that you refused invasive care. I said, that's not true. We told you clearly from the outset that we would do anything for him. But we were told that Seattle Children's refused his case. She said, Seattle Children's would never turn down a case. How quickly can you get here? I said, 5 minutes? She said, well, make it 45 minutes and pack up for tonight because the baby's going to surgery tonight. Rabbi Deitch, you probably remember that Friday when I sent out a message saying the baby's going into surgery. The joy was so beyond description. I can't even go there. It was really, really incredible. The Megillah has this description of the situation completely turning over, and that's exactly what it was, where there was unbelievable joy. So the surgery itself, thank God, was a success. There were ups and downs and all that kind of thing, but there are a couple things that I want to get to in our talk besides for that. Number one was the conversation that we had that night with the surgeon. The surgeon told, we're talking about different options. And I said, well, what are the success rates for babies like this and, for these different options? He looks at me and goes, look, if you'd have told me that a kid with your son's disease would go for 5 days without any surgery, I would give him a 0% chance at life. And he's the most stable kid in the unit. He said, you can do whatever you want. This kid's indestructible. And that was this incredible attitude. And we were so thrilled to have that kind of attitude that there's a team that's working with us and understands, that there's something beyond here. And that was really, really something special. And throughout, we were seeing that. In fact, that night, sometime around when Shabbat started, right before Shabbat started, they got him onto an IV. And suddenly his oxygen saturations, which had been in the 70s and lower 80s, which we later found out was incredible for a kid like that. And they started to drop. And the doctors turned to my wife and goes, oh, that's the PDA closing. The PDA is that small hole between the heart and lungs. So it only started closing 5 days after the one dose of prostaglandin that they gave him on Monday. And so that itself was incredible. And later I was talking to one of the surgeons and I said, there's a pretty big miracle that the PDA stays open like that. Rabbis are always pushing the miracle side of things, right? And he goes, yeah. I said, what, it wasn't a miracle? He goes, it was a miracle, but you don't understand. I said, what do you mean? He goes, the PDA is tiny. And even with the PDA staying open, it still didn't have enough room or enough space to be able to have blood flow for his entire body. He says, we still don't, even with the PDA, we have no idea how he actually had oxygen saturations in the 70s and 80s for those 5 days. So when I told this to a friend who's a neurologist, and he flipped out. And I said, why are you flipping out? He goes, you don't understand, because as doctors, we usually look at 2D images and we're guessing what's happening in the 2D imaging. Surgeons who go inside and they have the actual information. He said, for one of the heart surgeons to have picked up the heart and looked at all the piping and systems going in and to say, this is not physically possible, that is the very definition of a miracle. It's not, it's not, so that itself was incredible. So scoot forward, the first surgery that was done was a correction of several of these defects, but one of the things that they do for single ventricles is they have a series of three surgeries. The first one, they put in a shunt. The shunt is called a Blalock-Taussig or a BT shunt, and that's to be able to shuttle blood flow between the heart and lungs. 3 weeks later, we got a phone call at 2:30 in the morning. And again, Rabbi Deitch, you probably remember those Tillim sessions. When that phone rang in my room, I promise you I was covered in cold dread from head to toe. Somehow I knew something was wrong. And pick up the phone, they said, Mr. Estrin, your son's gone into cardiac arrest. The shunt clotted, and we're doing CPR on him right now. You need to get to the hospital. So he sped over to the hospital, and they're doing CPR on him. And there were several remarkable things that happened that night, and I don't want to go through them all. But the one incredible thing was that when I went onto WhatsApp and onto Facebook to tell people to say to pray for him, on Facebook I saw a message, and the message was from one of my friends to my father. He posted on my father's wall. He said, I just saw Rafi in a dream. Rafi is my older brother who passed away of cystic fibrosis in 1997. And Rafi, in this dream, told this guy who was on the East Coast, and so this is at 6:30 in the morning, something like that, 3:30 in Seattle, so 6:30 in the morning. And so he said, I just saw Rafi in a dream. Rafi said that the miracle happened because he has remarkable parents. Just absolutely blown. This guy had no idea that we're going through what we're going through right now, and I had no idea what was going on. We had no idea even what the miracle was, but I said to my wife, I said, he's definitely going to be fine. With a message like that at that particular time. So they stabilized him, and that was 50 minutes of CPR, that's 50, to get him onto something called ECMO. And we went back to his nurse to thank her for saving our son's life, and she told us the most remarkable thing. She said that she was planning on taking her lunch break at 2 o'clock in the morning. So he was already out of the ICU at this point. He was already several days away from coming home. And so this nurse is responsible for 4 children. And when she takes her break, she gives those 4 children over to a different nurse who's now responsible for 8 children. So now you can see the chances of something going right are dropping. It's the middle of the night. It's on the regular floor, so you don't have the regular doctors around or anything like that. And so in order to be able to make things easier for the other nurse, she went around her children to make sure that all of their medications were given and all the things that needed to be taken care of. One of the things that my son was on at the time was a feeding pump, and he had milk bags which have about 4 hours worth of milk. And she knew that this milk bag was going to run out. So she was planning on changing the milk bag, but she forgot. So she went to go take her lunch, came back, she went to go take her lunch, and the nurse 5 minutes later hears the alarm for the milk bag going off, and she goes into the room to change the milk bag. She changes the milk bag, takes a look at the baby. He had slipped under the covers, so she moved the covers over his face, and she sees he looks gray. She calls Carly, the nurse, and says, Carly, does this baby always look this gray? And Carly told us, she said, I could hear the fear in her voice. She sprinted across the hospital, took one look at Nissi, and said, code blue. There was a respiratory therapist in the room next door. I can't even describe how incredible that is, but just to say that CPR is extremely important, but good CPR is crucial. And the respiratory therapist is the #1 person that you want doing CPR. And so immediately they were able to start CPR. And so she said, I think that we were able to get him onto ECMO, this heart-lung machine, as fast as physically possible. And we might have even started CPR before he went into cardiac arrest. So there's this incredible, incredible miracle going on. I'm going to take a little skip backwards because I realized I mentioned his name and I forgot to tell you about his name. We chose the name before he was born because my wife said, I want a name that would describe the feelings I want to have. So she chose the name Nisano, which means God gives. And then when he was born, we were trying to figure out, okay, he's living, so we got to call him a nickname of some type. So we decided to call him Nissi, which means my miracle. And so there's this incredible, influence, or this unbelievable flow of I don't know what to call it, energy, whether it is or whatever, from the name that God gives and the nickname of Nissi, my miracle, that just go throughout this entire story. Moving forward a little bit, during that time after the cardiac arrest, even though they had stabilized him, he was in really, really dangerous condition, and he would desat, so his oxygen saturations would drop like an anvil. They're supposed to be, of course, in normal people, they're 99, 100 or 98, or if we have a cold, 95, 96, or a bad cold, 92. Kid like that, you're talking about in the 80s, and he would drop down to the 30s on a dime. We saw 17, which is enough for anybody to block out. And he would turn a deeper blue than my jacket. And it was really, really freaky. So they would shoot him up with drugs as fast as possible to try to get him to stop from this whole thing. But they're trying to figure out, why is he doing this? A week after the cardiac arrest, the doctor comes in. She says, I saw his x-rays and I swore. I said, okay, what's going on? She said, well, we think his intestine burst. And that as a result of the cardiac arrest, the blood flow did not go to the intestine. So I was like, okay, what's the plan? She goes, well, I have to get him surgery. Surgery now? I mean, this is incredibly dangerous. She said, well, we don't have any choice. So the surgeon comes in. He says, okay, we're going to open him up. We're going to give him an ostomy, which are bags for his waist, which he'll be able to have for about 3 months. And hopefully after that, we'll be able to. I said, 3 months? That's crazy. He said, well, we don't have any other choice. So this is something that we did before every one of his surgeries. We asked the surgeons to stop the team before surgery in their, when they're taking notes and, going through all the timeout is what they call it beforehand, and for everybody around the table to take on a positive resolution. And they all loved it and they all took that on. But we sent him off. We were really, really, at that point, that was one of the scariest parts of this entire experience, was we were afraid that it was the last time we we're going to see him. And 4 hours later, we get the information. Well, the surgeon, it sounds like it went well, and the surgeon wants to talk to you. And we run off to meet the surgeon. The surgeon walks into the room. There's swinging doors, and he threw the doors open like a gunslinger. Are you from Arizona? You guys would appreciate this. And he goes, without introducing himself, you guys know surgeons. Surgeons are, they're cut to the chase. They're professional. None of that. He goes, it was his appendix. When does that happen to a baby? And we're like, maybe there wasn't blood flow to the appendix. He goes, you don't understand. The appendix is smack in the middle of the intestine. He goes, the color wasn't great of the rest of the intestine, but that's no big deal. He just had a cardiac arrest a week ago. We sewed him up. He's good to go. We're like, yeah, he's good to go. Yeah, he's not exactly good to go. But it was just unbelievable how things swung once again completely the other way around. So it was another one of those unbelievable moments. Moving forward, and just, we actually put all this down, and God willing, we'll publish it in a book sometime soon. But, over the time, we saw that the one valve that he has in his heart, we all have 4 valves in our hearts. He only has one. It's called the common valve. So that common valve was put under tremendous, tremendous pressure as a result of the cardiac arrest. And so the flaps on the valve started stretching, and then that causes the heart not to be able to pump as efficiently as it's able to in a normal situation. So the baby looked like, needed to go into a valve replacement. My wife did not want to do that, and she called around. She found Boston Children's has one of the top valve repairmen in the world. Repairman, I don't know if he would appreciate me calling that. But in any case, so Nissi was at this point 1.5 years old, and right before the surgery, we were supposed to have a catheterization, and they canceled that. And we're like, okay, great, one less, something under anesthesia, good. But then we go into surgery, and right before his surgery, Dr. Del Nido comes to say hello, and he says to us, he says, "Your son's heart is in terrible condition." He says, "It's regurgitating over 50%. I said, "You mean it's regurgitating, it's working twice as hard?" He goes, "Much, much harder than twice as hard." So Nissi is sitting in this red Little Tikes car, and he's got this cherubic smile on his face because he's got the steering wheel in his hand and he's loving it. The first time he'd ever sit in one of those cars. And Dr. Del Nido looks it over to him and goes, "We have no idea how he looks like this. He should be in heart failure." And it was just another one of these incredible moments of just everybody recognizing just miracle upon miracle upon miracle. So nowadays, thank God we've gotten through all the surgeries, all the expected surgeries, a couple extra, of course, for extra credit. And Nissi is this unbelievably happy kid. He can't walk yet because the result of the cardiac arrest is a little bit of scarring in the mobility area in his brain. But through therapy, thank God, he has full motion and he just teach himself how to walk. So we have several therapies that we're continuously doing, and he has, like, you'll see a picture of a gait trainer, which he has to be able to walk and kind of propel himself around and drive his siblings crazy all day. But this happiness is this unbelievable happiness. He's 4.5, and he seems to understand that every single moment is a gift. And just one last little anecdote about that, which I think is so poignant. He got a G-tube placed at some point. He was 2.5, actually. We had the G-tube and his bris at the same time. It was 2.5 when he finally had his bris. And sometime after that, I picked him up, and the tube for his feeding tube got stuck on the chair and jerked. And you can imagine that it's pinned into your stomach, so it pulls out your stomach. It's incredibly painful. And so he started crying, and you hold the kid tight because after about 10 seconds, he picks his face up. His face is still covered in tears, and he looks at my wife straight in the eyes and goes, "Happy now?" And that was that. And he still does that now. And it's just this unbelievable skill that all of us can learn from. If we only realize that life is truly, truly, truly a gift, then we can pick ourselves up with the pain, with the tears on our face, and just say, "Happy now." So I give us all a blessing that we should be able to take that to heart, and to be able to take this experience to heart. And that's why I share it with you. Rabbi Rimler, if you want to flip through some of those pictures quickly, just I'll kind of quickly narrate them, and then afterwards we can go to some questions. Can you pull them up over there? It'll happen eventually.
Usually a third time's the charm.
Sorry, just getting right here. Thank you so much, Aresh. That was very inspiring.
It's a necessity to be able to share it. Certain experiences are given to you for the purpose of sharing it. So it's truly, truly, truly a pleasure. Are you still having problems with it? We can go to Q&A.
It's taking a little while, but we are. There we go. Okay.
So the first picture we're going to see over here is Nissi immediately after birth. My wife asked me to take pictures. We didn't know how long he'd live. You can see a little bit of the purple skin tone over there. Flip to the next picture. And that's, when things calm down a little bit. But basically, this is the baby that we were looking at. It's like, how do you look at a baby like that and say that there's nothing to do? Just wait for the kid to die. But that was what was going on. Go to the next shot. There's the guy I mistook for Doc Brown putting a tefillin. And somewhere behind me is the garbage can where I threw that card out. Go ahead, next one. And there's one of the shots that he took of my wife holding Nissi there. And this is Nissi shortly after the first surgery. Go ahead. This picture is particularly, one of my favorites because it was taken about 4 or 5 hours before the cardiac arrest. And so you can see how good he looks here. And, it was so shocking to be kind of just driven all the way back. So it's particularly intense. But here he's eating food through what's called a bingy trainer, where he's sucking on a pacifier, and through that is a little straw, which feeds him milk. So that was back then. Go ahead, next one. That's the cardiac arrest for any of you cardiac surgeons. There's 90-degree angle there somewhere. That's where the clot pushed the shunt down. And next. And that's the first time we brought him home. Again, Rabbi Dutch, you might remember that picture. I think the look on our face is more shock than anything else. But go ahead.
A little exhaustion.
And there's
also.
Nissi right before the valve surgery. And that's what I was referring to in the last little anecdote that I told you. And then the next picture. The kid to my right is the ex-preemie. That was right before Nissi's Upshernish 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago at this point, and the rest of them. And next shot, go ahead. And that's Nissi and his gait trainer. And that smile is typical. As you can see from the next picture, I think there's one more picture up there. And that's what Nissi looks like on a daily basis. He is an unbelievably happy kid, and it's an incredible thing. Despite whatever he can't do, it just doesn't bother him. The smile is just always there. So that's my story, and it'd be an honor to answer any questions.
Wow. Have you ever thought of going back to the hospital that he was born in and showing these pictures to them and saying, what are you guys thinking? Don't you understand the value of life? I mean, it's shocking. I mean, you want to smack these people in the head. I mean, it's just crazy.
I did before we left Seattle. I took Nissi back. It was pretty painful. We saw the nurse that took care of my wife that day that I mentioned that, had been crying. So seeing her was special, but seeing some of the other doctors was, they were so full of themselves and so haughty, sometimes it was really incredible. So there was a certain amount of catharsis and a certain amount of pain. But one thing I did do was I returned, we were cleaning up, we were getting ready to move to Miami at that point, and I found the DNR. And I returned it to the NICU. So that was just a little bit of, feeling a bit sassy that day. I took a picture of Nissi holding the DNR. It's somewhere on my Facebook page, a little bit ridiculous. So yeah, there was a little bit of that, but we tried. We did try. And we did do several investigations to try to get them to understand the mistakes that they made. Eventually, especially once threatened that we would go into the media, they finally agreed to change certain protocols and stuff like that. But ultimately, unfortunately, an organization as big as the University of Washington, they would rather protect themselves than people, and that was a tragic reality that we learned, that the difference between a good doctor or good medicine and bad medicine is in terms of how they look at humanity and how they look at their patient. Is this a human being, or is this another lucrative number? And I think that's just something for people to understand. When you go into a doctor, you have to feel comfortable with the doctor. You need to know that this person has your best interests at heart. And that's something that, it's a relationship. You have to recognize that relationship. And I think the Rebbe's words, to find a doctor who's a friend, is very, very important. And our mistake, of course, was to think this guy was a friend and not to recognize, sooner. Of course, we never would have expected that anybody would have done what he did. The investigations revealed that basically he had taken control of the case and refused to let anybody allow into the case, and that was basically what had happened.
Oh, so he was the guy that told the children's hospital and everything.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Sweetheart.
Hey.
Wow.
if anyone would like to unmute themselves and ask any questions to Rav Estrin, then you can go ahead and do so. I'm sure you have plenty of questions to ask.
Come on, guys, it's more fun with questions.
So while everyone's thinking of their questions, so besides the exhaustion and the emotional thing, what kept your faith and your what kept you strong?
You know, we never really felt, it's a funny question because we never really felt that we were having faith. This is reality, you know, and I don't want to sound more spiritual than anything was, because it wasn't. We were at gear on gear. We were as low physically and spiritually as we possibly could. But we did know, and we do know, and this is something that had been kind of driven into us from our youngest age, that we have a relationship with God, and that God cares about us. The Baal Shem Tov famously said that every single Jew is as beloved to God, and even more so than a single child to older parents. And so, you know, I remember praying some days, basically thinking, God, I've got nothing, but take my nothing, you know, and that was part of it. It really was, you know, I would say that education that we'd been gifted, and those feelings that had been kind of fostered throughout our lives and that we had thought about, and the things that we wanted to inculcate into our children, those things all came to the fore. It's like, what do you have? You have got nothing else but yourselves, you know, as your, you know, the couple, yourself, the husband and wife, and God. You know, that's what it was in the darkness of the hallway, you know, going to find out that, you know, that they're doing CPR on your kid. That's what it was. At the same time, from a broader perspective, there was definitely, you know, once the baby was, you know, once the world knew about the situation, there was definitely the communal support that we got from our friends and from friends that we didn't know. You know, that was unbelievable. You know, the joy that we had during his first surgery, I can't even describe the joy. It was ridiculous. You know, they're coming in talking about, yeah, we opened up your son's heart. There was no fear whatsoever. At that point, it was absolute. We were absolutely sure he was going to be fine, and that was partially because of the fact that, you know, the miracles had brought him to that point, and we were very cognizant of the fact that it had taken major miracles to get him to that point. But it was also because of the fact that we knew that thousands upon thousands of people were there with us in that room. So, was that a scattered answer or a direct answer? I'm not really sure.
That's good. No, it comes from your years of subconscious training to have, you know, to be strong, and then the communal support also. Someone sent me a private message. They said, how much did your older children know, and what was their input?
Excellent question. We were in conversations with therapists before the baby was born to be able to kind of plan out if the worst was going to happen, God forbid. We didn't want to, you know, do dumb things. We wanted to make sure that they would be as okay as possible. And so the first thing that I think was really, really important was that children need stability. And that was critical. And so we kept that at the forefront of our minds throughout the entire thing, that our children would have as stable a life as possible despite the chaos. And we kept that as best as possible. Before the baby was born, we mentioned to the kids that the doctors think that the baby might be sick. And then the first night after he was born, when he was still alive, you know, I came home and basically told the oldest two, and I called them into my room one by one and said, you know, God brings some souls into this world for a short amount of time. You know, I had a conversation like that, broke their hearts, and basically left them crying with my mother-in-law. And I was like, okay, I can't do it to number three. I was just I didn't have it anymore. So I just left. I said to my mother-in-law, bye, you clean up the mess. And that was basically, and then obviously afterwards, you know, on Friday when we were able to tell them, oh, the doctors, by the way, they think they can do something. So I was like, oh, okay, great. And then after that, we really made them into a force towards his healing. So they would come in and be a part of the experience. They would they would say Shema with him, the nights that we brought him into the hospital, and they would come in and they would sing to him, and they would hold his hand or his foot, whatever area of his body wasn't hooked up to machines. They could try to, and their investment in him, I think, was really, really crucial. And it was all with joy. It wasn't with fear or anything like that. We anytime things were serious, we didn't bring them in. But we tried to give them a certain amount of information that would not throw them off course, but basically feed them into what we were going through to a tiny degree so that they could understand Mommy and Tati are exhausted. So there's a little bit of that kind of going on. And thank God they really, really did well. They did so well, actually, that Seattle Children's created a brochure for children who have siblings in the ICU. And they featured my kids in this brochure. And so it's a very funny brochure because it looks like a brochure that comes straight out of Tzivos Hashem, because the yarmulkes, basically kind of, where the tzitzis are hanging out there, the Chabad skirt and all the whole thing. And Seattle is not exactly a bastion of ultra-Orthodoxy. So it's just a very, very funny kind of thing. But they really became kind of part and parcel of the experience for the nurses and for the staff, and they loved him. So that was it was a beautiful part of it. And thank God they love him to pieces, and he loves them to pieces. And the one thing they can't stand about him is basically whenever they try to have a good old-fashioned temper tantrum, he doesn't let him, because he'll come over to him and say, Minachi, be happy. And basically, what are you supposed to do? And so, that basically, it's just, you see the kid just kind of melt, and within 3 minutes, the kid's running off yelling. So it's unbelievable.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Hi, Rabbi.
Please,
Can
go
you
ahead.
hear? Oh, hi.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I'm not on camera. This is Melissa.
No problem.
Thank you for sharing your story. I was just thinking about how many little times throughout your story that Hashem was showing you that he was holding your hand with these, but your eyes were open to see it by also looking at each moment as a way to also help another Jew. And I'm wondering how that impacted you. Did you feel that in the moment? Like when you put tefillin on someone, or when the nurse, or when she said that she happens to be Jewish, were those moments that you could feel that you had more of a purpose, that Hashem was right there and saying, hey, you're in this moment for a reason? Absolutely.
That without a question. And there's one other part of the story which I neglected. Before the baby was born, I flew to New York to go to the Rebbe's gravesite, and to ask the Rebbe for, to intercede on our behalf or whatever it was. And, as I was walking out of the shul outside of the, the cemetery, there was a video of the Rebbe playing, and the video that was playing was in honor of Tu B'Shvat, because my son was born on the 29th of Shvat. So that was just a few weeks later, obviously. So, but what the Rebbe was saying on this video was that the Torah compares the Jewish people to trees, but not just specifically to trees, but fruit trees. And the idea is that we need to be fruitful. We can't just be trees that don't have fruit, but we need to bear fruit. We need to have purpose, and the purpose has to impact other people. And I remember seeing that and thinking, all right, whatever happens has a purpose, and whatever happens, there's going to be some kind of fruit that will arise from this. And so that was definitely something that powered us through it. Part of it was that if, God forbid, the worst happens, then that's God's own problem, and that is what it is. We don't understand necessarily the purpose of a soul in this world, let alone a soul that comes into the world for a short amount of time. But certainly, without question, when we got to those moments, the moment of that guy putting on tefillin, and the moment of the nurse telling us that she was Josh's sister, it was unbelievable. It was really, really, it was truly uplifting in a way that can't be described. About a few months ago, I sent Josh a message and sent him a picture of Nissi and said, hey, send this to your sister. And she responded with basically, just this kind of, I don't know, maybe bamboozled is the word, you know, kind of half notes in text messaging, and basically just in shock that she was a part of it, and made some comment, I'm shocked that we didn't all get sued or something like that. But it was, the point was not to give her a guilt trip, because certainly she didn't do anything wrong or anything like that. It was just to inspire her and to invigorate her, and to realize that as a medical professional, you are working with God. You are not the defining factor. You are part of, you're a partner
miracle.
with God.
Yeah, part of the miracle. Right.
Absolutely. And I think that's an important part of it. So, but yes, absolutely. We definitely felt those moments very, very clearly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Somebody asked, why are you called the Husky Rabbi on Facebook? That's because the University of Washington, their mascot is the Huskies. And so I first joined Facebook in 2005, when Facebook was brand new and just for college students. And so it was, give yourself a name. So it was, I'll be the Husky Rabbi. So it was just, so I was 13 years the Husky Rabbi, but you can't change your nickname on Facebook anymore.
I have, Rabbi,
Sure.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I just, from what you said earlier, just when you were answering Melissa's question, you said, if God forbid, your son died, you said that was God's problem. Can you just, I haven't heard that term before. Can you explain a little more, if something happens, that's God's problem? Can you expand on that a little for me, please?
Sure. I will say the term was used firmly tongue in cheek. But what I was saying is that basically, God does certain things we don't know why. I'll tell you a powerful experience that I had, and this was, in my work with Aleph, one of the things that I do is contact people, in the military, find out where they are and try to make sure that they've got everything that they need, in terms of books and supplies, make sure they have contact with the Jewish chaplain and all that kind of thing. So I called this woman who's, we didn't have any information on her. And I said, is, Sergeant White there? And she kind of was like, hey, who is this? And I said, well, my name is Chaplain Estrin, Rabbi Estrin with the Aleph Institute. We've got your name in our database here. And she says, well, I haven't been Sergeant White in several years because, number one, I got married. Number two, I've been out of the Army for 5 years. And number three, I don't need that bleep that you're offering, because after the things I saw in Afghanistan, I don't need it. And I was like, oh boy, okay. I said, well, I don't want to, God forbid, comment about the things that I haven't seen or anything like that, but would you like to hear what Judaism has to say about tragedy? And she said, sure, go ahead, be my guest. I said, well, there's a famous story, and we actually mentioned this on Yom Kippur, that that during the destruction of the temple, or after the destruction of the temple, there were 10 famous rabbis who were killed in horrible ways. And the Medrash talks about God complaining to, or the angels complaining to God, saying, God, is this your Torah and this is your reward? And God's response is shtuk, kachala b'machshava, which literally, if you're an Israeli, you'll hear that word basically means shut up. This is what came up in my mind. And the question, of course, is what kind of comment is that? What kind of answer is that? And so Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad, has this unbelievably beautiful explanation. He says the word shtuk means silence. He says when it comes to instances of great tragedy, we can't approach them in an intellectual manner. The only way to be able to approach them is in a way of silence. So I said, I can't give you any answers. All I can do is join you in silence. And sometimes you can hear over the phone when something resonates with someone. And we continued, the conversation went for about 45 minutes. And then after a little while, she said, well, Rabbi, it's been great. I need to go. I said, okay, keep my phone number. If anything, I'd love to help out. She says, well, actually, if you don't mind, please send me those books. it's been a long time since I had a conversation with a rabbi, and this has been really, really good. And I almost danced across the room. It was like this really, really special moment. But that's really what I was alluding to when I said, it's God's problem, so to speak. It's in God's domain. And I don't profess to know one reason or another thing. Sometimes we get glimpses of moments of connection, and that's what, of course, this photographer from And Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, that was one of these glimpses into one of these really, really special moments. And we try to make ourselves aware of those. We put our antennae out and we say, okay, what is the message? God, what are you putting me here for? What can I get out of this? What can I learn from the situation? How can I impact somebody else? And that's also one of these ideas that we're inculcated with this. This is who we are. We're ingrained with these ideas.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Estrin. Cannot thank you enough for your warm words and your, heartbreaking yet exhilarating journey. I think the dream of your brother Oliver Shalom saying that everything's going to be good because you have great parents is clearly evident and to be
not
true.
In me, in my parents.
Oh, your parents. Oh, I thought it's the parents
No,
of
it wasn't.
Nissi.
It wasn't
Oh,
about me. If it was about me, I wouldn't have told you that part of the story.
Either way, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So Hashem should continue to bless you with good things and success and happy things. I'd like to ask Rabbi Tzvi to close this out, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining and for supporting and helping us out. And we'll continue to have more of these just incredibly uplifting stories and moments. So thank you very
Truly
much.
a pleasure. And I'll send you that picture so that you can post it on the Western chat, that last picture.
Excellent.
That way
yes.
You can send everybody, remind them all that, Baruch Hashem.
Amazing. Yes. Really amazing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Very inspiring.
Joining.
Thank
Very
you.
uplifting.
Thank you, Rabbi Estrin. Your message of persevering is very resonant in these trying times, and thank you for inspiring us to keep on going and try finding the light at the end of the tunnel, like you found yours. We will find ours with Mashiach. Thank you so much for staying till midnight with us, your time, of course. And a wonderful evening to you all. We have exciting events coming up. Tisha B'Av, like Rabbi mentioned, as well as a drink mix evening coming up soon. Stay posted for the details. Thank you so much again to Rabbi Estrin and to all of you for joining. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.